time to introduce our speaker for today, and we're excited to have Pastor Eddie Anderson with us. And just in the way of introduction, he's done a lot of important things, but he is a social activist, author, and pastor. He matriculated at Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia, where he received his bachelor's degree in theology. And that's a very important and prominent place to matriculate. The late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King matriculated there. So that's a good place. And then he also attended Claremont School of Theology in Claremont and received his Master of Divinity there. And that is also one of my alma maters. And so we definitely share Claremont as a background. Reverend Eddie is currently the senior pastor of McCarty Memorial Christian Church in Los Angeles and a community organizer with Los Angeles PICO in Los Angeles, California, and also co-organizer of Trust Talks Los Angeles, Trust Talk LA in Los Angeles. And Reverend Eddie, in terms of his leadership work, is an advocate for Black Lives Matter. That's why he's here today to talk to us about some of those important matters and why Black Lives Matter as an organization and as a people. And then convener and co-chair of the New Poor People's Campaign in Los Angeles. And that is the organization led by Reverend Dr. William Barber. And he's also a board of director, Claremont School of Theology in Claremont, and also board of director, Progressive Christian Uniting in Los Angeles. I met Reverend Eddie probably 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago. And we did work together in Los Angeles with LA Voice PICO. And then also outside of that, when I was working for the city of Los Angeles and Councilmember Marquise Harris Dawson's office there, working with the religious community. And so we did a conference there, and we did a conference there. I think it was about the fall of the year, 2-3 years ago. And of course, I could not have that conference without making sure that we had him on the agenda to speak about the importance. And I think it's important also that he speak to us today because he is a young person. He's a millennial, and he wasn't living when Thurgood Marshall was placed on the bench. He wasn't living when Martin Luther King was around. And when many of the great strides took place, but yet he shares the passion, he shares the vision. And I thought it was very important that we spend some time in conversation with him to hear about what he's doing and why it's important that we be involved in this whole idea of community activism, social activism, and particularly as it relates to social activism. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome to you today, Reverend Eddie. Are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for having me.
Awesome. So good to see you. And he's there at his church. Now, one of the things that is so powerful, I read up on McCarty Memorial Church. I grew up in LA, and I was familiar with Adams, the churches in the West Adams area of Los Angeles. That church has been a Black community for probably since maybe the 50s, probably 1950s, or maybe even earlier than that. And that church was actually started by a white couple, as I recall, the McCartys, yes. And what was so powerful about that, the church was founded in 1932 by a white couple, Disciples of Christ in Los Angeles, in this predominantly Black area. And then by I believe the 1950s, the church decided we gotta do better than this. We have to include our community. And the church from that point on, they did a San Bernardino mountain retreat, took 70 people with them, and engaged in this racial harmony situation, right? And so I thought that that was so powerful when I first read about that story, and again, had seen the church for years and just did not know that powerful story. And the Reverend Kring Allen was really the founding pastor that got the church to move in that direction. So just tell us a little bit before we get started about that church, what your experience has been pastoring this multiracial church, and it's a multi-generational church. And tell us a little bit about your experience and what that's been like for you.
Thank you. I've been blessed to pastor McCarty Christian Church for the last going on 6 years now. And as Dr. Thomas has said, it was founded in 1932. It was initially a white congregation, and it was a big Catholic cathedral. And in the 50s, Dr. Kring Allen came and said he wouldn't come to the church unless the church did integration. And so if you can imagine, in the middle of the 50s, where most of the state is segregated, most of the nation is still segregated, Dr. Allen asked for a Black minister to come to join him on his staff. And they went door by door, and they invited the Black neighbors to come and worship with them. And from that moment on, they've been involved in social justice. In the 60s, this church chartered buses and went down to Mississippi for the Freedom Summers. I have members of my congregation now who were some of the first Black people to do covenant busting around housing covenants. And so Bob and Helen Lilly, they live out in Monterey area, and Monterey Park, and they were the ones who broke through and were the first Black couple. Bob was an astrophysicist and a lawyer, and he wouldn't leave. And the church organized with them as well. And so this church has always been working towards social justice. In the 80s, when Dr. Rousseau was here, Alvin Rousseau was here, the church was bringing in homeless folks and trying to figure out how to make sure we meet the needs of the times at that time. And so my experience has been really living into what does it mean to be the hands and feet of Jesus at this time, and that for each generation there is a ministry. And so that has been a blessing, and it's very multi-generational. We have members all the way from 95 years old in our congregation, and they were here and came from the South, and some of them were members of Dexter Avenue when Dr. King was pastor, all the way to little 4-year-olds who run around the church. It's majority Black now, and it has been since the late 80s, but we're still a multiracial church and have multiracial members in our congregation.
Awesome, awesome. Now most of our listeners are African American, but I think that this is a model for what can be. So I want to ask you some more questions. So, what percentages would you say are which ethnic group? And I know that's probably something you all don't talk about much in your context, but we want to know. What are the percentages? Talk to us about that.
Well, our church is predominantly African American right now, so I would say we're probably around 80 to 90% African American.
Okay.
We have had a larger couple of years ago, a larger Asian American population, because we had a Korean church that would worship with us, as well as Ethiopian, which shares African, but Ethiopian church that would worship with us as well. And it was one big church. My wife is actually white, and so we have white members of our congregation as well. And so I think that's how our congregation breaks down now, and we are very intentional. If you notice, a lot of our educational programs and youth programs serve the community. And so those programs are around 60 to 70% Hispanic or Latinx. And so we really try to bring everyone together. So if you come here for a basketball program, the instructor will be Black, but the players may be a Latinx, and that's just how we do it for the glory of God.
Amen. That's awesome. That's exciting. Now, how many Black pastors have been there since 1950, or when Pastor Cring Allen started?
There's only been around 3 Black pastors before me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. And so you make the 4th Black
Yes.
pastor. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Good. Fair enough. Fair enough. Awesome. Awesome. And so yeah, just really interested to know. So what kind of music do you all listen to?
Oh, it's
kind of
still Black
music is
church.
played?
It's still Black church. So you hear gospel music at the church very much. I'm a
Oops, we muted you on accident. Oh, thank you. Good. Great.
Yeah. I'm a 3rd generation Black pastor, and very much steeped in the gospel tradition, the Black church tradition. That is who we are. So you hear that at the church.
Okay, I'm just curious because sometimes, I mean, if we're honest about it, sometimes when we go into these multicultural situations, we have to surrender some of our culture, and put that on the negotiating or the chopping block. So I was just curious about that. Another pastor, Anthony Boger, came on to talk with us a few weeks ago, and he has pastored multicultural churches as well, and he has maintained his African expression in African, and what he did is he actually exposed those who weren't as familiar to African culture or African American experience, and really shared it from the standpoint that it is in some ways very close to the biblical model, right? As opposed to sometimes the very sedate and cerebral and quiet approaches and classical approaches to music and to worship. And so very good. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question, which we just weren't.